So you did ultimately transition to Marvel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you did Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe. Was that your first Marvel work? Or?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, where did that come from? Because, like, like, first of all, why did you gravitate towards Punisher? And why did you gravitate towards him killing the Marvel Universe?
There was an editor there called Mark McLaren,
Mm-hmm.
and he, as I recall, got in touch with me. And I think he might have said, we think you'd be a good fit for the Punisher.
Okay.
And I agreed with him. You know, at that point, he was the only character I could ever have imagined writing for Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
The Kills the Marvel Universe thing, I think that was just too much fun not to do, really.
Right.
You know, like, let's this should make a splash. This will be a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
The book came out, and I think it did make a bit of a splash. I still sign copies of it. People are still into it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It wasn't a brilliant experience because some of the dialogue was rewritten.
Oh, really?
And I was kind of annoyed about that, and I was not used to that at DC.
Right, yeah. Right.
You know, at DC, it was far more, okay, if there has to be a change, we'll tell you, and you do the change, and it'll be far more organic.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see in that book, there's Frank's dialogue goes weird from time to time. And I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to being rewritten without being consulted.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, I guess that's me done at Marvel then. And then what happened was, of course, that so you could call that a false start. And what happened was, a few years later, Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti did their Marvel Knights imprint, and they were interested in me doing the Punisher. And I talked about this previous experience, and they said, that won't happen. We'll keep those people off your back. And that's been, to this day, the best experiences I've had at both Marvel and DC have been working with a few sympathetic individuals in editorial who'll keep everyone else away from me. Although, to be fair, at Marvel these days, I'm told that people all the way up to Dan Buckley do really like what I do on The Punisher, so there isn't that same sense of intrusive, invasive editorial voice.
Yeah. Actually, I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true or not, that Joe Quesada kind of pretty much told you, you can write Punisher as long as you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he did. Initially it was just going to be 12.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, it makes no sense not to do an ongoing. And initially I was going to do 6 on and 6 off, which is why 7 through 12 of that run are written by, I think, Tom Peyer.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right, yeah.
But then I came back on at 13, and Preacher had finished, and Hitman was coming to an end, and I really liked writing The Punisher, and I thought, why not just stick on it?
Yeah, right.
And then 9/11 happened, and I had a totally different view of the world all of a sudden, or perhaps I'd had a view of the world that I hadn't really want to acknowledge confirmed for me, and I thought, with The Punisher, I have the perfect character to look at the world and how it's now being viewed and what it's become.
Yeah.
Not because I wanted to go into the specifics of 9/11, but I wanted to talk about a kind of world in which something like that would happen, in which we would have to acknowledge that dreadful things could come down us at any minute. Really, 9/11 is America discovering what the rest of the world's like in one ghastly, horrific gut punch moment.
Yeah.
But I wanted to write about that, and that is why we stopped the regular book, which was a bit wacky races sometimes, with polar bears and things.
Right.
And went over to the Max book, and that was such a great fit. And it fit exactly where I was and how I felt at the time. And, well, the rest is history.
Actually, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I do enjoy coming back to the character. I've got this new one starting next month. It's a 6-parter.
Yeah.
And it's been great writing Frank again. It's been wonderful.
That the boys, right, kind of ruffled their feathers a little bit.
Yes, it did.
But, you did the Pro previous to that.
Yes.
About a couple years prior to that, and, nothing happened. Did that take some convincing to kind of get out there, or
the Pro in a way thematically you could say is a sort of precursor of the boys, a far less serious one. It had been done for Image, and I'm told that that book ruffled a few feathers at DC because the characters in the Pro are very obvious pastiches of the Justice League characters. here's Superman, here's Batman, here's Wonder Woman, here's the Green Lantern type guy, and here's the fast guy, and And I believe that some senior people at DC were a bit upset by that, but regular editorial was just, come on.
They were fine with it,
you know. And then the boys came along, and I never did find out what the straw that broke the camel's back
still don't
was.
know.
I still don't know to this day. It's something in those first 6 issues, so take your pick.
Right.
But something enraged someone to the point that they kicked up a fuss, that it became an issue, that the next thing I knew, we were out the door.
Oh, jeez. Right, yeah.
And, in a way, it's really been one of the greatest moves of my career, because trying to finish the boys at DC, at Vertigo or Wildstorm, under the restrictions that we had to put up with there, would have been a disaster. Whereas at Dynamite, an independent company, there are no restrictions at all.
Right.
The other thing is, of course, that Dynamite, because it's quite a big book for them to have, were able to throw their all into it. The book didn't get lost in the mix the way it might have at DC.
Right, yeah.
Dynamite promoted the hell out of it. It's been a great team to work with and be part of ever since. It also got me away from the big two and into independent comics in a way that I hadn't really before. Obviously, Avatar, Image, Aftershock, more recently TKO.
That's right.
That's been tremendous. That's been a big difference. I mean, that has helped me realize some ideas that really have been running right through my career. One of the very first people I met in the business was Alan Moore.
Okay.
And he said to me, own what you create.
Right, yeah.
Don't let them do to you what they did to our generation. And it's a lesson that I took to heart. And the move into independent comics, of course, has made that so much easier.
Right, yeah. It was a little. One of the things I find fascinating about the boys is it's kind of unprecedented that you were able to maintain the rights. Is there a story behind that? Because typically I feel like it gets consumed by the publisher and they kind of hold on to it.
Yeah, I think DC were just that they did play ball. They were decent about it. I believe I have again. I don't know all the details. I don't know what went on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But I believe I have Jim Lee to thank for that one.
Okay.
But they gave it back to us lock, stock, and barrel. There was just never any question of them retaining an interest in it.
Right. I guess they wouldn't know what to do with it if they did, right?
Yeah. And also, I got the sense of please take that away from us and don't bring it. Don't ever let us have to look at it ever again. Please,
right,
God.
Right. So actually, I know you've answered this before, but I want to hear you say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you have against superheroes?
What do I have against superheroes? I mentioned earlier that, not reading them as a kid, I could never develop that affection for them. Superheroes themselves are, to me, they're not actually worthy of anger or hatred. It's the lock the genre has on the industry.
Right, yeah.
I would love to see more diversity in terms of genre. I would love to see more crime comics. I would love to see more war comics, obviously. I'd like to see more romance comics, more kitchen sink drama comics. I'd like to see a European approach taken to American comics, and I'd like people to get out of that mindset where when they begin writing a story, maybe they will start out doing a crime story, but it'll go, and then the guy finds a magic ring, and that helps him defeat the mafia, that sort of thing. Where even if they start in another genre, the superhero thing is never far away.
Right, yeah.
That kills me. So it's not the superheroes themselves. It's the lock they have on this industry, on this medium, in America and to an extent in Britain as well. That's what gets me done.
Okay. No, again, I totally get that. Part of what we do, previews is let people know about everything that's available at your local comic shop because it's a wide range of things.
And as you said, comics can do anything.
They can do anything, right. Actually, I wanted to ask you also about adaptations. So, of course, Preacher got turned into a TV show. The Boys is a TV show as well.
Yeah.
Is there ever any moment where, you have some anxiety about, how it's going to be adapted or what's going to be adapted? Or do you just kind of just go, let it go?
I think at this point, I'm very much the latter.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who just says, let it go, and understand that the series is going to be the series. The book is going to be the book. And the nice thing is, of course, that in both cases, the book doesn't go away. The book, all of a sudden, gets a second lease of life. And that's been tremendous in both cases, particularly with the boys. So, no, I don't worry about that too much. Ultimately, I write comics. I don't want to sit in a writer's room. I don't want to beat my head against a wall. I don't want to have to please executives. Ultimately, what I do, what I write, goes on the page. There's no filter except the imagination of the artist. But in Hollywood, film or TV, everyone gets a say. You know,
becomes a committee.
Yes. That doesn't mean that good work can't be done. Plenty of good work can be done, but sometimes it's in spite of the system rather than because of it. If you like what I do, it's because no one got in my way. And that wouldn't be the case in film or TV.
In terms of, so, you know, some people like to call Brian Michael Bendis the Quentin Tarantino of comics, right? I don't know how you feel about Quentin Tarantino, but
I like him very much.
Okay, I kind of figured as much, but I didn't want to assume. I consider you the Quentin Tarantino of comics. Like, I think that, like, you know, you are ultimately, like you pointed out earlier, you're doing, in terms of like what Tarantino did, he took genres and like all these different genres that people kind of take for granted and then represented them to like arguably a mainstream audience, and like therefore that audience had a new appreciation for those things. And so I'm going to ask you a question I've heard Quentin Tarantino ask it a lot of times, just because I'm curious about how you feel about this. So I don't know how closely you follow like some of the stuff that happens in the news, like, you know, in terms of popular culture. You know, The Joker, right? The movie came out, and everybody was freaking out about all.
I'm aware of some of that.
And so I'm just very curious in terms of, because I know you've gotten some flack before for like, you know, the content or whatever and your stuff. Like, how do you feel about media violence and like its influence on the culture and vice versa and all that stuff? Like,
I'm really of that generation that did not see a connection, and I still don't see one. I don't believe that there's a link, because otherwise, a book like Preacher, which by now has sold, God, it must be millions of copies. It must be. There are clearly not millions of slavering psychopaths out there as a result. The same is true of the number of people who see violent films, watch violent TV shows. I would imagine that if you taped someone to a chair, taped their eyes open, and forced them to watch extremely violent pornographic material for days at a time, keeping them awake with stimulants. Yes, of course, you could eventually have some sort of an effect on them. But no, I simply don't believe in that idea that people are that easily influenced. I think it's far more to do with upbringing and environment and how you were raised by your parents and so on.
It's not too many Clockwork Orange scenarios going on in households, I'd imagine.
Right. Let's hope not.
Let's hope not. You did direct a movie. You directed a short film called Stitch.
That's right, yes.
How did you find that experience?
It was a tremendous experience. I really enjoyed myself, and it taught me I'm no good at it. Because the end results, and this was my fault, you know, I accept full responsibility, the end results were not good. And it simply taught me one more time that I should stick to writing.
Hey,
you know,
you're good at it.
I should follow my own path and not let myself be swayed. So great experience, but a wrong turn.
A wrong turn. Okay. So Carlos Ezquerra just passed away. Like last year, late last year. And I actually got like a pretty great education from the 2000 AD guys about Carlos. Like, and actually got me more into British comics in the last several months. But I was very curious because you have worked with him before.
Oh yeah, many times.
Like, what was that experience like? What is like? Can you give some Carlos stories or?
Well, I can tell you that it was terrific. He was one of those artists like Steve Dillon, who just did the job. People ask about my relationship with Steve, and I always say, work-wise, I wrote it and he drew it, and we just trusted each other to get on with it. When we talked, which was often, it was very rarely about work. Same is true of Carlos. He was just one of those guys that, although he had a very different style to Steve, he had the same basic work ethic, which was just get on and do it. And it was wonderful to work with him. It was wonderful to write characters and see those weird little Ezquerra grotesques appear on the page. Those weird sort of potato-headed little men. It really was a delight to see him do that with characters that I had come up with, you know. And now I have like the Tankies and Rifle Brigade and Condors, all this material that we did together, and it's, I suppose, my own memorial to him in a way. You know, you never see these things coming. It would, of course, been lovely to have worked with him one more time, but mentioned, and I think it was at that point I was starting to realize, you can do good stuff in comics. You really can.